Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
And welcome to the podcast. It's episode 90. And in this episode, I talk with Dr. Michelle Anthony all about family ministry. Now, many of you are going to be familiar with her writing. She's written numerous books about family ministry. Spiritual Parenting is obviously a really, really popular book and resource and a study, and we talk about that. We even talk about how she uses it in her church. And in the conversation, we end up talking more about what this looks like at her church than we really do kind of about the points in the book and some of the resources and all the things that I thought we were going to talk about. And I think you'll love it because we went there because as we were having that conversation, I thought, I want to know more about that. Can you tell me about the parent orientation? Can you tell me about the path, the plan that you have for parents, when they first get there, and as they get more involved in the church. So I think you're going to love this conversation. There's a lot of resources and links and things like that. And you can get all of that at nickblevins.com/episode 90. She mentions an intake form, like a kind of a questionnaire that they use with new families, and they use it in different settings to try to get as many families as possible to fill it out. And we're going to link that in the show notes as well. So I asked her about that after we recorded, and she'll share that. She felt like it's a very simple thing, but I thought that was something that you would love. So I asked for that, and you can get that in the show notes also. So let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Dr. Michelle Anthony about family ministry and what it looks like at her church. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Michelle Anthony. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and your ministry before we jump in here? Okay.
So my husband and I, Michael, we've been married for almost 30 years. This summer it will be 30. And we have a 25-year-old son. We have a 27-year-old daughter. And my husband and I really have been in some form of ministry for our entire marriage. My time in ministry has been primarily children's and student ministries, most recently for the last 12 years in a family ministry model. And most of our years together and raising our kids were in California, and then we moved here to Colorado 3 years ago. And at that point, we started at a church called New Life Church. And there I am the executive family pastor and currently overseeing birth through student ministries along with the parenting ministry as well. And so we are loving Colorado. We're loving this new journey that God has had us on. But I've done things since education. I taught at a Christian university, and we've done a lot of missions work as well. So somewhere in between all of that, we've learned family and family ministry and have a real heart for it and still learning. And so that's a little bit about us.
Cool. And most people will be familiar with your books, Becoming a Spiritually Healthy Family, Spiritual Parenting, 7 Family Ministry Essentials. And we're going to talk all about family ministry, which I think is kind of like, I don't know, you've obviously seen this, but in the last decade or so, that conversation has really blown up. And it feels like one of the top, like it always seems like ministry leaders, the top question is, how do I get more volunteers? But question number 2 seems like, how do I connect with parents? How do I help parents?
Yeah.
And I don't feel like that was the case, 20 years ago, but it certainly feels like it now, which is a good thing.
No, you are absolutely right. Having done this for the last 30 years, we are asking different questions, and I think that they're the right questions. And so I'm thrilled to be a part of it. I'm thrilled to be helping add to this conversation and asking those kinds of questions and then passing on that ministry model to the next generation where they can build upon that in significant ways.
So congratulations on 30 years, by the way. That's good.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
I say to everyone in Colorado, like my friends that live there, that your pictures and Instagram stuff are like the best, because it looks so beautiful out there.
It is. It's really beautiful.
So I want to start just talking about like what's changing in family ministry. So again, the whole conversation feels newer, a decade old or more, 15 years, something like that. But that's a lot of time for things to change too, especially as it feels like everybody's learning. So we're trying things that doesn't work, try something else that works a little bit, So what would you say is still changing in terms of how churches do family ministry?
Well, because family ministry is a response to the family, and the family is always changing, then I think that is why we're always morphing. And I believe, in a pure children's ministry model or student ministry model, students and kids change a little bit, but they're still developing in ways that we can track for centuries, and we understand psychological changes and physical changes and developmental changes. And so our ministry model roughly remained unchanged for many, many, many years, decades and decades. When you enter into a family ministry model and now you're responding to the family, that's where we have to find our balance in what are the things that are stable and what are the things that will be changed. And so I think one of the things that's changing in family ministry models is how diverse families are becoming. So when I started in family ministry, to children and their parents years and years ago, we had, of course, 2-parent homes, and we had single-parent homes, and we had blended families. And those were really the 3 major family units. But now there are literally hundreds of types of families. And then you bring in things like same-sex marriage and gender identity issues and all of these facets. You have nuances of those 3 same categories, but you have so many offshoots. And then even just keeping up with the language and what the definitions are, and then understanding what those families need from the church and what the children in those families need. I would say that's one of the biggest issues for us in trying to stay relevant in family ministry.
How does, in relation to that, how can ministry leaders stay relevant there? Like I was reading, I think it was Pew Research's 2015 study about the family and just the different statistics with that. I had heard people say the stat that 25% of families are made up of parents in their first marriage with their biological children. I don't even know if that stat is true. I couldn't find that anywhere, but I did find that Pew Research study that dove a lot deeper. So it was easy to look at like single parent families, education. I think it was something like 46% of kids will at some point have lived with like their mom and then another man who's not married to, like in a different relationship or something like that. So how do you, there's so much, right, that's out there. It's hard to find. It's hard to even understand sometimes. How do you recommend leaders kind of keep up with that and use that information well?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of research studies going on about the dynamics of families. And I think finding reputable sources is a great way to just sort of understand. We are in an age where we can get online and we can Google things and learn. But I also feel that we are to steward and shepherd the families that are in our church. And so for us, I want to know what's happening out there, but I also want to know what's happening in my city and my church. And so we do a little bit of an intake when new families come to our church, and it's just tell us about your family and tell us about your family structure so we can better serve you and your children. And some people really put their whole life out there, and some people are a little bit more close-lipped, and we find out over time through relationship. But when we determine how we would identify a family, that really helps us know who we have. So in our church, we have many, many families who are doing foster care or foster to adopt or have adopted their children. So we have a higher percentage than even the national average because we live in a city where Focus on the Family did this big campaign several years ago to get every child out of foster care and into adopted homes or out of the system into foster care. So we have a large majority of those. And so for me, I've had to learn what it means and what are the special needs that those families have when they're doing this. I think every church is finding that we have more children with special needs. So developmental needs, physical needs, intellectual disabilities. This has become greater just in our population as a whole. And so it's become a greater population in our church. So we need to know those. And then just yesterday, we actually did a volunteer training to help us understand families and language for foster homes, adoptive homes, and then the difference between intellectual, physical, and mental disabilities. And the wide range of those. But what's in common of those things is that we really just need to have compassion. We need to feel confident to deal with these people. We need to be loving. We need to ask questions so that we understand those family structures more. And then knowing, this is what the Bible teaches, knowing the condition of your flock. So I think just being in relationship with our families and letting them know that we want to know about them.
How did you, because I think me and probably everybody else listening is probably wondering, what did you do for the training? Like, did you do that training? Did you bring somebody in? What was the content? Because I find that leaders want to train and equip their volunteers as best they can, but sometimes there's just they just don't know where to go. Like, where can I get helpful resources? And you hit two areas, really. You talked about the foster adopt families and how to best serve them, but then also the difference in disabilities and special needs and those two things. Those are two big topics that I think leaders would love to just hear. What did you do? And, where'd you go for information about that?
Right. So we are a large church with a large ministry staff. And so both of these individuals are on my family staff. They are skilled and trained. They have the background in education, and they just happen to be on our staff because we have so many of these. But, I would say there are these advocates out there in your communities that are trained for foster care, for adoption. Most adoption agencies have a family advocate or a person who can come and do trainings at your churches. And then I would look to the public school systems that have full-time, most of them have full-time resourced or part-time resourced staff who deal with special needs. And so they have that background and that education. So any of those probably would be willing to come and give seminars at your churches, or they're doing seminars at the school that you could invite your parents to those schools. So I would look to adoption agencies, the foster care system, and to the public schools for their special need advisors and teachers that would help you. You might have them in your church too. You could always put something in the bulletin or on the website that we're seeking professionals in these areas to do trainings at our church.
Yeah, that's good. I know we had the folks in our church that really helped us with special needs. And we have families in our church, certainly, who are adoptive families. But that might be one where we probably go out to the county and say, hey, is there somebody who could come? And our experience has been, like you're saying, they're totally willing to do that, which is great.
Yeah, we recently did a similar thing for parents to do sex education training. And we brought in the same person who does sex education in the school system. And we found we put the faith on it. So it was led by our pastors, and we put the faith piece on it. But just for sex education statistics, what's happening, what they're covering in the schools, it was really good for our parents to hear from these people who are doing this day in and day out. And then we were able to kind of pastor it and bring it back around. But those people are out there in our communities, and they're great to tap into.
The other thing I think people would love to know about is you mentioned like kind of the intake form. I'm guessing, is that like a form that a new family fills out that asks certain questions? Right.
So when they first come to our church, they really just register their name, their address, their contact information, their kids, their date of birth, because that's usually the day that they're coming to go to church. But then we do a follow-up email to them, and it just gives the heart of our ministry. It welcomes them, and then it asks them to tell us a little bit about their family so that we can better minister to them, and we give them examples like, tell us about your family structure. Are your kids with you full time or part time? And are there any specialized needs that your child might have? And we use the word specialized needs because we believe that while there are special needs that we now have language for, whether those are, intellectual, mental, or physical disabilities, we also know that every child has a specialized need. And that might be an allergy, but it might be that their father or mother are deployed right now and they're really going through a hard time, or they're in the middle of a divorce, or they might just have sensory issues that aren't necessarily that have a name, but they might just have some of those anxiety issues or make it hard to make friends, ADD, things like that. So we really allow them to tell us as much about their family as they want to at that point. And not everybody does it, but we can only minister to them to the extent that they tell us. Oftentimes we discover these things along the way as they build trust with us, and we encounter their kids or their families at events or other things. But we do give them that opportunity to tell their story.
That's good. Do you get a pretty good number that fill that out?
We do. We probably, I don't know the percentage, but I would say we probably maybe around 50. I'm just guessing 50% of our families do that initially, but we give them opportunities all along the way. We host a parent orientation, and after spending the evening with them, I think they trust me a little bit more, and I then again offer them to tell us about their family, and I think they understand the context. So I think we'd probably get another 20% from that. Then throughout our classes, we offer parenting classes and spiritual formation and parenting classes and child dedication classes. And again, I give them an opportunity, and I would say we pick up a good number out of those. So along the way, somewhere along the way, we get their information.
That's great. Yeah, that's good because it's a core part of everything you do. You're basically given that form out in pretty much any environment you can get them in, which is good.
That's right.
So I'd love to back up just for a little bit, kind of higher level. And you mentioned some things you're doing in your church with parent orientation and even classes for parents. What should be some key components in a family ministry at a church? Like if I'm just drawing it from scratch, or maybe I have one and you're going to help me evaluate like what's missing or what I'm doing, what is there that's good. What are the key components you think of having a good family ministry in a church?
Well, I get asked this question a lot. So I think we back up one step and we say, what is the family ministry model that you would like to achieve? And I do talk about these in my book, 7 Family Ministry Essentials. But the thing that we kind of have to come to realization is that we can't be all things to all people in our community. So I talk through a family-friendly model, which is really just to have some experiences where families can get together, whether it's a retreat or a picnic or game nights. And it's really just to give fun opportunities to parents and their kids. If that's your goal, then you're going to create a different ministry for that. There's also a family-centered model, which is we're really going to pull the family together at all times. We're not going to separate the ages. We're going to worship together. We're going to, have meals together. Our small groups are intergenerational. Our mission trips are intergenerational. If that's your goal, then you're going to set up different programs. There's a family sensitive model where we're really going to go after the social issues that are difficult for our families. We're going to do after school kids programs for parents who are working. We're going to do financial recovery courses, divorce care for kids and parents. We're going to offer recovery classes and 12-step programs for families who are in addictions. And they're really going after those issues. So, of course, your programs would look different. My church and my leadership style is what I call a family empowered model. And our goal is, though we might have some of those other things, our main intent, the main lens that we look through is how do we empower parents to be the spiritual leaders in their home. So you'll see that my programs look different because they have an intentionality for equipping parents to take on that spiritual role. So first of all, I would say that you kind of pick where you're going to be, and you might be a blend of 2 or 3 of those, but you pick what you want. And then from there, you would build a path. And this path would say, here are all the pieces I'm going to offer, whether it's courses, classes, events, resources, and then I would put them in a path so they make sense. What do I do first? What do I call my parents to first? And then what do I do next? Rather than a smorgasbord kind of approach. And I think early in family ministries, we did this. We just had a lot of good stuff, and we borrowed the best from every church we heard of and, conference we went to. And then we created a menu. And I think parents came and they looked at the menu, and it's kind of like going to Cheesecake Factory, right? And you're just so overwhelmed because there's so much. And maybe they did nothing, or they did a few things, but they just felt overwhelmed. And so instead, my approach really is to put it in a cohesive order. Even though we know that there will be multiple entry points, I want a cohesive order, and I just tell them the one thing to go do first. So for us, it's parent orientation. Everybody that comes the very first time, we point them to an orientation, because at that point, they're going to understand our church, what our mission is, what our part is, and what their part is, and how they can get involved. And it just really lays the groundwork for them. So I would say essential, no matter what model you're in, invite your parents to a parent orientation. We say it's our desire for 100% of our parents to attend. It's hard to say mandatory, but it's 100% of our parents. And then from there, you can tell them about your ministry, what your model is, what you're going to offer, and how you encourage them to get involved.
That's good. I feel like I want to dig into the orientation and hear a little bit more about it, but I feel like most leaders I talk to want the family empowered model. I've run across a couple like family centric, and there are a ton who want family empowered, but they're still really back at this place where it's not really any of those models. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we're taking care of your kids. It's the model I feel like a lot of us grew up with, which was, church took care of kids while you were there, and you did whatever you wanted at home, and it'd be great if they worked together somehow, but there wasn't like a lot of intentionality there. But it seems like the family empowered model is like what everybody wants. When it comes to the orientation, what does that look like? How often does it happen? How do you invite them? I think we'd all love to hear about that. How long is it? Like, what does that look like at your church?
Okay. So, parent orientation, we offer 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring, and then 1 during the summer. And for us, we make little postcards that in the fall, when new families come, they get one of those. We're inviting them. When we first started, we had to get all of our existing families, and that's a little harder because they feel like, oh, I've been here, I know what's going on. But that was a series of emails and a series of videos that I made just telling them how important I've only been at this church for a little less than 2 years. So I really put it around. I want you to hear my vision and where we're going and things like that. But our new families are a little bit easier because they're coming in, they're bright-eyed, like, where do we start? What do we do? So they're a little bit more interested. We say that it's kind of like going to a back-to-school night. Parents are familiar with that. It's so you meet the staff, you understand the curriculum, you know what our programs will be, how to get involved, and then how do we minister to your kids, and how can you partner with us, and we help them connect all the dots between all of our resources. So we have postcards, we send out emails, we put it on our Facebook site, we put it on the website. I'm a big proponent of we communicate always. And always. So ALL in always, and then always work consistently. So both of those, we have to just be communicating. So it's all of those ways. And then once they're there, we serve light refreshments, just making it warm and welcome. We want them to feel honored and loved. And so we have meatballs and, veggie platters and crackers and cheese. And we know a lot of times families are coming straight from work. And so we don't want that to be a hindrance. And so right away, they just feel loved and welcomed, and they get some food. And then once they sit down, we have them sit at tables according to their children's age. If they have multiple children, they can pick, but we have elementary, early childhood, nursery, junior high, high school, and then we have mixed tables, so if they can choose that too. But at each of those tables is one of my staff or a key volunteer that works in that area, so they know about that program in those areas. And it gives the parents a chance to connect with somebody that they're going to see on a regular basis. And then we usually open it with a couple questions. My 2 questions that I start with them, and they talk about this at their tables with the other parents. The first one is, what is the most difficult part about being the spiritual disciplers of your children's faith? The primary, we say primary spiritual disciplers of your children's faith. And that's a great question. And of course, we have a leader at the table, because either people say, I have no idea what that means, or they are talking about the things like time and lack of knowledge. And we kind of get a read on where these families are at. And then we open it up to large group and we share about that. But by asking that question, we're also telling them that we do believe that it is their primary role. The second and follow-up question is, how, as your church, can we support you in your role to disciple your children? So what is it that we can do to play a supportive role? We're also telling them that we believe it's our job to support them. And we hear all kinds of things from them that are really good for us to understand where they're at and what they need from us. And then the rest of the evening is me casting vision about who our ministry is, why we're structured the way that we are. They meet our staff. We put our staff in chronological order of the age groups, starting with nursery all the way up through young adults, in how they connect so that their children won't fall off in the gaps between these different transitions. And then we share all of our resources. We have a resource table, all of our programs that will happen, the dates. They can put them in their calendar or take pictures of the slides. They know their whole calendar in advance. And then we open it up for Q&A. And we are in and out within 75 minutes. So it's an hour and 15-minute program. And we really stick to that. We keep it moving so that we do honor their time. But it's been very well received, and it's really made a difference for us to be on the same page for language and vision and philosophy.
That's great. I've heard of like some churches doing kind of like back to school type night, but mostly with the emphasis more on connecting parents with like their leaders, like the kids' small group leaders or something. I've not heard as much of this idea, which I think is great. And you're doing it, it sounds like 5 times a year. So you got them pretty frequently. So if you're new, you can get one soon.
Right.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah. One of the things I do wrestle with all the time is we're giving parents resources and trying to partner with them, but are we ever even talking to them about what we're giving to them? Because like sometimes you come in new and you kind of get plugged into whatever communication or resource chain there is, and all of a sudden you're just getting stuff, and you don't even know what it is.
Exactly.
How to use it, or whatever. And orientation would be a great way to teach that. That's good. So from there, you've got the orientation. I love what you said about having a path for key components in a family ministry. I think that's great. What would you say, before I jump on to this next question, I think another challenge that churches face is, not all churches are the same size. So I feel like you have to prioritize based on your size and even your families. What recommendations would you give to, churches of different sizes? You get a church of 250 or you get a church of 2,500, with where they start. You know what I mean? And then, and how much they do. Because at some point you just can't do everything. So, where do you cut it off?
Yeah, I would say, between a small church and a large church, a lot of the key components are the same, but it's scalable. So if you are a smaller church and you we'll have 100 families visit every 2 or 3 months. And so that's a new 100 families that we put into each of our orientation. But if you have, 5 families every 3 months, then, you're going to scale that down. But I would still say it's just as frequent because you don't want them to wait 3 months, 6 months before they get into an orientation. So the design might be different. We're at large tables and it's a big event, whereas that might just be at a pastor's home or in a living room, or it could be in a small group room at your church, and it's just more intimate and you're sitting around a table having a conversation. But yeah, I think it's more not even the amount of things, but how you execute them. But from us, I would say we go from parent orientation and then we tell them what we want them from there, which is to get involved somehow to do spiritual parenting, which is really what we use to train our parents to help them be the spiritual leaders, because we are in that empowerment model. And we offer it through small groups and homes. We offer it through an annual conference that we do. We offer it through audio, video, like a DVD series. They can take it at a class on a Sunday morning, like a Sunday school class, or they can read the book. So it's kind of like, which way will you take spiritual parenting, not will you take spiritual parenting? And then from there, we ask them to do the resource that we provide for them, which is available for our listeners. It's called Homefront Mag. It's Homefront Magazine, but it's at homefrontmag.com. And this is a resource that my church creates. I've been working on this project for the last 15 years in different places that I've been, and now we've just made it available to the public for the last maybe 8 years. And this is a resource that's basically their family curriculum for the month, and it's based on the spiritual parenting materials. That's why we want them to go to that first, but you can use it without going to spiritual parenting, and it just gives ideas for crafts and conversation starters, how to bless your child, how to be in God's Word, prayer time, and then there's a lot of fun things to do with your kids too, like games and just seasonal fun things. And then there's articles for marriage, for spiritual grandparenting, tough topics, dealing with teenagers. And so there's resources to fill up the parent or the grandparent, but then there's also fun things to do as a family. So that's the next thing we send them to, and it's available in our lobby every week. They can pick up their copy of it. And from there, we do quarterly family nights. So we're actually asking them to do a family night once a week in their home using this fun curriculum. And then quarterly, we become a family of families. And everyone comes together intergenerationally. And we do all the facets of the magazine, all the little articles. We turn them into stations. We worship together. We eat together. And then it's kind of choose your own adventure. And parents and kids and grandparents go throughout the whole church into different rooms. And they get to experience and do crafts together, be in God's Word together, kids in the kitchen, whatever it is, as a family of families. And a lot of times that's an entry point for our families. And then they understand, oh, okay, when I take the magazine home, then they understand how to use it. Some people start with the magazine and then, oh, this would be fun to do with other families. And then they come to the event. But that's really what we offer as our staples. And then in addition, we do a kids camp and we have a missions trip and we do some parent-child events. But those are just, those are the toppings. Those are the add-ons. But those things that I mentioned are really our path for the year that we want all of our families engaging in.
That's great. And so you have it. I love that, like you said, it's not like a menu or a smorgasbord. It is a path. And you've got your book, Spiritual Parenting, or at least the study version of it early in there. So there's orientation, some version of spiritual parenting. And then you're doing these Homefront Mag, and you're doing that on your own as well as gathering. So that's a great plan. I know a lot of churches use Right Now Media, and the spiritual parenting studies on there too.
It is, yes. So that's one of the ways that they can get it, sure.
Yeah, our church uses it that way, which is great. So beyond that, I mean, that's a great comprehensive plan right there. But is there anything else that you give to parents to help them lead at home? Because that's another question I'm sure you get all the time, which is, how do we help parents lead at home, especially with busy schedules and priorities? I love that. I mean, what you have right there is a great plan because you're modeling for them what you want them to do. And you're doing spiritual parenting on the front end to sort of train them, get them in the right mindset. Right. Is that the whole plan, or are there other little pieces too that you give to them, or, resources, things like that?
Yeah. The Homefront Mag, if your listeners go online and look at it, it's pretty large. So it's a lot. It's really, for me, rather than giving them 45 different little pieces just to put it all in one place, I think simplifies it. And it's also beautiful. So I think, and it has value added. I don't think it's going to end up in the floorboard of a car or, made into a paper airplane. Yeah. It has substantial value to it. So it's really a one-stop shopping. Everything you need for your entire month is in there. And one night, you're not going to do all of it in one night. If you have a family night, you might sit and have dinner together and play a game. Or another night, you might sit and have dinner or lunch together or breakfast together, and then you might do God's word and a blessing. And one afternoon you might just do the craft and do a create together, or create a tradition. And so parents are reading articles. It's kind of everything is in there. But in addition to that, parents do care what their kids are learning in church and their classes. So we do a take-home paper each week that they can pick up for what they learned that day, but also what they're going to be learning the next week. So it serves as a pre-teach. And we also offer that in a series. So every 6 to 8 weeks, we do a series. We'll give them all of that up front if they just want one packet. But for people who come, now and then, that really works good for them because they can have the whole series. But for people who I just want the week, what we just did, then we have just the weekly version too. So those help them have the conversation with their kids about what they just learned. But for the family empowerment piece, that's really our Homefront magazine piece.
And what I love about that, real quick, is that, again, going back to whatever size church you are, it really wouldn't matter. If somebody wanted to adopt this strategy, they need a parent orientation, get parents through spiritual parenting in some form or fashion. Again, it's on Right Now Media, very accessible. Do the book, whatever. And then Homefront Mag, you say, can be used by everyone. So somebody could just say, hey, I'm going to adopt this. It's my strategy. And
yeah, right. And then after Homefront Magazine, you just pick out some of those articles and you create a family night at your church, and you have those articles become stations. So the create station has all the materials to do whatever the craft is for that month. And you have kids in the kitchen. If you have a little kitchen area, they can do that. It's super simple. You can have a blessing station, a God's word station, a prayer station. So you don't even have to come up with what are we going to do for a family night. It's already all there for you. So that we do train other churches just to adopt this model. They don't even have to reinvent the wheel if they want. Of course, they put their fingerprint on it. They make it their own. It has their look and feel and their vision and their mission in it. But it's just a simple strategy that anybody can use. Yes.
One other thing, we were talking about this before we recorded, and I told you it's one that I've been asking a lot of church leaders about, and that's the idea of getting parents together in small groups and community. A lot of churches that happens just by chance, or, it's just they want to get adults in small groups. And of course, along the way, some of those are going to be parents who end up in groups together, either with like same age kids or, different mix or whatever. What does that look like at your church? Is that something that's highly intentional, trying to get parents in small groups together? Is it something that it happens and you're strategic about it at some points, or is it not a big focus? I keep asking that because I want to hear. I feel like community for parents is a big need, and so I love hearing what churches are doing.
Yeah. Community for parents is a big need. I tend to be on the side of the spectrum that says community for parents is best developed in intergenerational settings. So right now, my husband and I, we've been married 30 years. We have adult kids, but we're investing in a lot of young parents' lives, and they want to see our marriage modeled. They want to hear about how did you get through those early years and what discipline measures and how did you navigate this or rebellious years or whatever it is. So we find that a lot of young couples want to be in relationship with older couples to have some of that mentoring. And then for the fun part, like play dates and things where they get to go do life together and share meals, then those opportunities are really fun when you're in the same age and stage. So it kind of depends for what. So we do offer both. We offer small groups that are more topical. So you might be going through a book of the Bible, or you might be it might be for the purpose of mentoring. Or it could be about foster adoption or whatever it is. Money matters, things like that. Or we do have age and stage ones, which is, the early years or bringing baby home, or MOPS kind of groups for moms that they have preschoolers, parents of teenagers. And so we do really offer both. And then on top of that, just some of our events lend themselves to that. So if we do a father-son fishing trip, a lot of times that is just the elementary kids, boys with their dad. And so that allows them to do that age and stage kind of thing. So I would say we have a blend, but I would say philosophically, I lean toward really allowing people to be in community with the generations together.
Yeah, that's good. I know that I love that. And I think a lot of leaders I talk to, that's what they want to get as well. I just don't, it seems like I know our church and a lot of leaders I talk to, there's not a big emphasis on getting parents in groups intergenerationally. It's more just, get adults in groups. And if it happens, if there's an affinity because they're parents or whatever, that's great, but it's not a huge strategy. But I like what you said too, where you have these opportunities for them to get in short-term groups. To have some of that community focus on that one topic. So I'm guessing they step out of a small group and jump in this group and then go back, or do they double up?
All of our small groups run for a season anyway. So you could take spiritual parenting for a season. You could take it for teenagers or for younger years or for blended years. And then you would, when that's completed, then you would just jump into a different small group at that point. And then some small groups are just doing life together and they go through different books and different books of the Bible, and those have longevity. They might, as a group that's been together 2 or 3 years, then they might just adopt spiritual parenting as their content for a season until they're finished. So yeah, there's some fluidity of that. And then there's also the stable groups that kind of go on and on and on. I know when my husband and I were leading a young couples group at a church, it was young marrieds. So they had just gotten married, but then we went through all the stages of having kids and, raising teenagers. And every year we did a camp out trip. And then that camp out trip lasted until all of those families are now empty nesters. And so we did do the whole life just together kind of thing with those groups. But along the way, there was, a women's group I was a part of, or my husband was part of a men's group, or we did a Bible study together.
I feel like the time went by really fast because I could ask like a million more questions, but that's all the time we have. And so before we wrap up, we'll include in the show notes links to everything we talked about. So all of your books, the Homefront Mag, the spiritual parenting, not just the book, but even the study and things like that. But how can people connect with you? If they have questions, if they want to look into these resources, what's the best way or a couple ways they can connect with you?
Sure. I have a public Facebook page. It's called Follow Michelle. If you like that page, just go on and like it, and then you can ask me questions or direct message me from there. I have a website, michelleanthony.org, and you can see some resources on there and different things that I speak on. But those would probably be the best 2 ways.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing some of this with us. I really appreciate how you're resourcing parents and the church in this area, which again feels new-ish, in the last couple decades or whatever, and is such a big need. And I just love what the church is doing, and I love how you're helping push forward that conversation and resources. So that's great. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
That was great, wasn't it? I mean, I just love talking to churches that have like an actual plan and a complete strategy for partnering with parents. I feel like sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And I just learned so much from how other churches are doing it. Here's some action items I thought of coming out of that conversation. One is obviously I would get her books that she's written on, family ministry, spiritual parenting. They're great resources. You could check out the study like we talked about on Right Now Media. But I think it would be great for you to define, what is your path? What is the 3 or 4 or 5 steps that you would love for every parent to take from when they first come to your church to when they're kind of fully plugged in? And I don't mean in the whole life of the church, like serving and in small group and all of that. But what would it look like for them as parents to take the 3 or 4 steps that you would like for them to take? What would those pieces be? Another thing would be to check out homefrontmag.com. That might be something you want to use and share with parents in your church and kind of leverage that as a way to resource and equip parents. I think that would be really, really helpful. And if not, maybe the action item for you is, how are we going to equip parents? We've had 2 folks on the podcast now who have kind of like parent websites, hubs, Chris Sasser and Phil Bell. If you go back and check out those episodes, you'll see that they have created kind of online resources for parents in their church. So maybe Homefront Mag is not going to be it for you. You're going to create your own. Whatever it might be, think through what is your path for parents and how are you going to resource them along the way. I love the parent orientation. I think that's the third action item, is I would think about having a parent orientation. And maybe you'll do it at the beginning of the school year as more of a one-off thing, or maybe you're going to implement it like they do and it's every couple months or something, so you can try to get every parent through it. But have a conversation or multiple conversations to see if that would be a good fit for you. And as usual, I should probably say this more than I do. Anytime you do any of this stuff, coming out of the podcast and you take some steps and you implement something, I would love to hear about it. I would love to hear that you're doing it, 1. But 2, I'd love to hear 6 months later or a year later when you've done it and, it either worked or it didn't or whatever it might be. I would love to hear how that's working in your church, or maybe you figured something else out. Please email me, nick@nickblevins.com. I'd love to know what you're doing. So again, you can get all the notes and links and everything at nickblevins.com/episode 90. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Next week, I talk with Jana Magruder about the new book that she helped write called Nothing Less, and it's from research that was done with Protestant parents whose kids are now adults. And it really just asks questions to figure out what were the most influential things in their kids' lives when they were raising them in terms of following Jesus. Like, what were the most important things? What were the things that, in the end were good, but they didn't matter as much? And you might be surprised at some of the results that the research has shown. So we talk about those top indicators that influence their faith. And we even talk about some of the things that didn't make the list. And that's all next week. Just subscribe and you'll always know when a new episode comes out. Until then, I hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.